Life is a journey full of twists and turns, and often we find ourselves searching for meaning in the middle of it all. You may have spent years building your life around stability, securing a job, raising a family, creating a comfortable home. But deep inside, you felt a restlessness. That feeling, that tugging at your soul, is not random. It's not just a fleeting moment of doubt. It's the whisper of something greater calling you to rise, to step into the purpose you were always meant to fulfill. You see, your path has been guided all along, and the truth that awaits you is closer than you think. As Americans, we're taught to work hard, provide for our families, and follow the rules. But for many of us, that formula for success can leave us feeling empty, disconnected from who we truly are. We focus on doing what's expected, getting the job, earning the paycheck, making everyone around us happy. But often, we forget to ask ourselves what we truly want.
What do we really desire? What is God calling us to do beyond the comforts of routine? And when that question arises, it stirs a longing deep in our hearts, one that we can no longer ignore. For years, you may have been walking a path that seemed safe, practical, and secure. You've done the right thing, followed the advice of those who've gone before you, and built a life that looks good on paper. But somewhere along the way, you might have lost sight of what truly matters, the deep connection to your purpose, to your faith, and to the divine plan that has been unfolding in the background all along. Now, as the restlessness in your heart grows louder, it's time to listen. The truth that awaits you is not one of regret, it's one of revelation. It's the truth that you've been prepared for this moment, for this shift, and for the calling that will redefine everything. This is not just another chapter of your life. This is the beginning of the story you were always meant to live.
The struggles you faced, the doubts you've harbored, and the pain you've endured were never meant to defeat you. They were preparing you for what comes next. You were born for something greater, something beyond what you can see in this moment. It's time to step into the life God has been guiding you toward all along. If you've been feeling like something is missing, like you're not living the life you were meant to live, this message is for you. The world has been waiting for you to rise. The truth that's been hidden beneath the surface is ready to be uncovered. Be ready for what's coming next, because your life is about to change forever. Don't wait any longer. Embrace the truth that awaits you. The path has been laid out. It's time for you to walk it. Now is the moment. You've been waiting for it, even if you didn't know it yet. The time to rise is here. In the small town of Winchester, Kentucky, there was a man named James Callahan who had spent the better part of his 59 years living a life shaped by duty, routine, and responsibility. He lived in the same house where he'd raised his children, on the same street where he'd grown up, working the same job he had held since he was 18. Every day felt like a repeat of the last, with little deviation from the pattern he had followed for decades. He woke up every morning at 5:30 a.m., brewed his coffee, ate his breakfast alone, and then set out for the construction site. He didn't mind the work. It was honest, steady, and it provided. But it had become so much more than just a job. It had become his identity. James was the man who always did the right thing. He took pride in being the rock for his family, the one who was always there when someone needed him. He had done everything society had expected of him. Work hard, provide, raise good kids, stay faithful to his wife, and never cause a fuss. And on the outside, it looked like he had everything a man could ask for. A good home, a loyal wife, 2 successful children, and a life that was stable and predictable. But inside, James felt the stirrings of something deeper, something he couldn't ignore anymore. He wasn't sure when it started, but over the past few years, James began to feel a gnawing emptiness, like something was missing, something he couldn't quite put into words.
His faith had started to feel more like a formality than a connection. Church on Sundays had become a routine, a habit, rather than a source of spiritual strength. The prayers he said at night felt like a duty rather than a conversation with God. He had spent so much of his life just trying to keep things afloat that he had forgotten what it meant to truly live with purpose. There were days when James would sit at the kitchen table after dinner, looking out the window at the fading sunset, wondering if he had missed something. Was this all there was? Was this what he had worked so hard for? The life he had built felt like a comfortable cage. It wasn't that he wasn't grateful for his blessings, but he felt as though he was living someone else's life. The life he had been expected to live, but not the life he had been called to live. One evening, as James was finishing up his evening prayers, he couldn't shake the thought that had been growing stronger in his mind. What if I'm missing out on the life God truly wants for me? The question didn't come with a clear answer, but it stirred something deep inside. He had always believed that God had a plan for him, but over the years, he had stopped seeking that plan. He had become content with just getting by, trusting that God would take care of him without asking for more. But that night, something changed. It was as though God had reached down and stirred his soul. The weight of years of complacency began to lift, and James felt a flicker of hope, a small but undeniable feeling that there was more to his life than what he had settled for. The next morning, James woke up with a sense of urgency that he couldn't explain. As he sat at the breakfast table, sipping his coffee, his mind wandered back to the questions he had been wrestling with the night before. What if I've been walking down the wrong path? What if God has something more for me? The thought was so foreign, yet so compelling, that it filled him with both excitement and fear. Could it really be true? Was there something more waiting for him? Something bigger than the life he had built? James had always prided himself on being a man of action. He had worked hard for everything he had, and the thought of stepping out of his comfort zone was terrifying. What would his family think? What would his friends think? He had spent decades building a life around the idea of security and stability. Was he really ready to give that up? As the days went on, the feeling that something had to change grew stronger. He began praying more fervently, asking God for clarity. He didn't want to make any rash decisions, but the restless stirring in his heart told him that God was calling him to something greater. It wasn't just about changing jobs or moving to a new place. It was about rediscovering his purpose, reigniting his passion for life, and following the path God had laid out for him all along. One Sunday morning, as James walked into his church, he was struck by how familiar everything felt. The pews, the stained glass windows, the familiar faces, all of it was a part of the life he had known for so long. But today, something was different. The moment he stepped inside, he felt a deep sense of expectation, as though God was about to reveal something he had been waiting for. As the service began, the pastor spoke of faith, of trusting in God's plan, and of stepping into the unknown with courage. God has a purpose for each and every one of us, the pastor said, his voice filled with conviction. It's never too late to step into the life He's calling you to. The path may be uncertain, but if you trust in His plan, you will find the fulfillment you've been searching for. Those words hit James like a bolt of lightning. It was as if the pastor had been speaking directly to him, urging him to take the first step in a journey he had been avoiding for years. James felt something deep inside of him stir, a reminder that he had been chosen for a purpose greater than what he had been living. It was a call to rise above the complacency that had defined his life and embrace the greater things God had planned for him. That night, as James sat at his kitchen table, he knew it was time to make a decision. He couldn't keep living this way. The calling was clear, and the fear, though still present, had begun to fade in the light of God's promise. The life he had been living was comfortable, yes, but it wasn't fulfilling his soul. He was meant to do more, to step into something bigger. And now, at 59, he realized it wasn't too late. It was never too late to follow God's calling. He took a deep breath and reached for his phone. His first call was to his wife, Karen. He had been married to her for 35 years, and she was the person he trusted most in the world. He wasn't sure how she would respond, but he knew he needed her support. "Karen," he began, his voice shaky. "I've been praying about something, and I feel like God is calling me to step into something new. I don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but I know it's time for a change. I want to serve others. I want to make a difference, and I feel like that's what I'm meant to do. I need you to pray with me about this." Karen listened quietly, and then, after a long pause, she spoke. "James, I know you've been struggling with this for a while. I've seen it in your eyes. If this is what you feel God is calling you to do, then I support you. We'll figure it out together." Tears filled James's eyes. For the first time in years, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had the support of his wife, and he knew that with God's guidance, he could take the next step. In the months that followed, James made the decision to step away from his job in construction. He didn't know exactly where he was headed, but he trusted that God would lead him. He began working with local outreach programs, helping at shelters, and volunteering at community centers. Slowly, he began to feel the stirrings of something greater. His purpose was unfolding before him. James started leading Bible studies for men, encouraging them to step into their own purpose. He shared his story, his struggles, and the lessons he had learned along the way. He saw how his journey resonated with others, how they too were searching for meaning and fulfillment. It was then that he realized his calling wasn't just about his own life. It was about helping others discover theirs. Every day was a new challenge, but James felt more alive than he had in years. His faith deepened as he saw the ways God was working in his life. He was no longer just living for security or comfort. He was living for something bigger, something eternal. And that was a life he had always been meant to live. James had spent much of his life searching for purpose, thinking that fulfillment would come from work, success, or stability. But now, he realized that true purpose comes from serving others, living in alignment with God's calling, and trusting that He has been guiding you all along. The truth is, your path has always been guided. The struggles you faced, the doubts you've carried, and the fears you've encountered are all part of the process. God is preparing you for the life He has destined for you. The time to rise is now. Step into the truth that awaits you. Your journey is just beginning, and the world is waiting for you to embrace it. It was on a Thursday morning in early autumn that Jake Patterson, at 56, finally felt the stirrings of change deep within him. It wasn't the first time he'd felt it. He had felt it years ago in his youth when he dreamed of traveling the world and helping others. But life had a way of pulling him in different directions. Responsibilities, commitments, the weight of family expectations one by one, they all took hold of him. And before he knew it, his dreams had been pushed aside, buried under the weight of his daily routine. Jake had always been the reliable one, the rock for his family. He had worked for over 30 years as a senior engineer at a manufacturing plant in Michigan, and while his job paid well and provided the stability his family needed, it didn't light him up the way it once had. The thrill of solving problems, the excitement of innovation, had long since faded. Every day felt like the same story: wake up, go to work, come home, and repeat. The weekends, though more relaxed, offered little more than the same sense of emptiness. He had everything he could ever ask for: his wife, Sarah, a beautiful house, 2 grown children doing well for themselves. But the question gnawed at him. Is this it? The restlessness had become more palpable in the last few months. It wasn't that Jake was unhappy. His family was healthy, his bills were paid, and he had a solid retirement fund. Yet every time he looked in the mirror, he found himself asking the same question. What am I really doing with my life? The faith that had once burned brightly within him, especially in his younger years, seemed like a distant memory. He went to church on Sundays, but it felt more like an obligation than a joy. He prayed, but his heart wasn't fully in it. Something was missing, and he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Jake had been raised in a Christian household. His father had been a man of unwavering faith, a preacher who taught him the importance of trusting in God's plan. Jake had followed that teaching for most of his life, living the kind of life that was expected of him, steady, responsible, and good. But now, in the quiet of his late 50s, he couldn't help but feel that the life he had built, the path he had followed, was not the one God had called him to walk.
That morning, as he sat on the porch, drinking his coffee, he looked at the tree-lined street and realized how many years he had spent waiting for something to change, waiting for some grand moment to come and disrupt his comfortable life. It was in that quiet moment that Jake heard a whisper in his soul. You've been waiting for the wrong thing. It's not about waiting. It's about stepping out in faith, trusting that I am guiding you. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it felt like a divine nudge. Jake knew, deep in his heart, that it was time for a change. Time to stop waiting for life to hand him an opportunity and start creating the opportunities himself. But the fear was there. The fear of change. The fear of stepping into something unknown. Something that wasn't guaranteed. It was easier to stay in the life he knew, to keep things as they were. But Jake knew that he couldn't ignore the whisper any longer. The world around him may have seemed stable, but it was a stability built on a foundation that wasn't fulfilling him. God had created him for more than this. He had a purpose, something that had been there all along, waiting for him to recognize it. Jake's mind raced as he thought about what his next steps would be. He wasn't ready to quit his job, not yet. The stability was too important for his family, especially with Sarah planning to retire soon. But he knew he had to make a change. He couldn't continue to live with this sense of emptiness. The call to do something greater, to serve others, was growing stronger every day. That evening, as he sat down with Sarah at the kitchen table, he knew he had to speak the words he had been holding back for months. Sarah had always been supportive of him, but this felt like a big shift. What if she didn't understand? What if she thought he was being foolish, chasing some fleeting dream at their age? The fear was almost paralyzing, but Jake knew he couldn't move forward without being honest with her. Sarah, he began, his voice unsteady. I've been thinking a lot about something lately. I feel like God is calling me to do something different, something more than what I've been doing. He paused, watching her expression carefully. I don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but I know I'm not supposed to just keep going through the motions anymore. I think it's time to step out in faith. Sarah looked at him, her expression thoughtful. What do you mean, step out in faith? She asked softly, her tone cautious but warm. We've worked hard to build this life, Jake. You've done well. I don't want you to risk everything on something that might not even work. I know, Jake replied, rubbing his hands together nervously. But I just feel like I've been living for everyone else, doing what was expected of me. I've been playing it safe. But I think it's time to live out the purpose I've been ignoring for so long. I want to serve others more directly. I've been thinking about going back into mentoring, maybe working with young people who need guidance. I've been praying about it, Sarah. And I feel like God is telling me this is what I'm meant to do. Sarah reached out and placed her hand on his. Jake, I know you've been struggling with this.
You've always been there for our family, and I've always admired that about you. If this is what you feel called to do, then I'm with you. I'll support you in whatever you decide, but we need to be practical about it too."
Jake nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it felt manageable now, because he knew Sarah was behind him. She didn't fully understand what he was feeling, but she trusted him, and that was enough.
Over the next few weeks, Jake began to explore the opportunities that had been tugging at his heart. He reached out to local youth centers, ministries, and community organizations that offered mentorship programs for young people. The more he researched, the clearer it became that his calling wasn't just about what he could give. It was about what God had already placed within him. He wasn't meant to wait for some perfect moment to appear. The time to act was now. In those early days, there were moments when doubt crept in. Would this be the right choice? What if it didn't work out? What if he failed? But each time the fear returned, Jake turned to God in prayer, asking for guidance, asking for courage. And each time, he felt the peace of knowing that he was walking in alignment with God's plan. He wasn't meant to stay in his comfort zone forever. It was time to take the leap, even without all the answers.
One evening, as Jake sat at the kitchen table, Sarah walked in with a warm smile.
"I think you're ready for the next step," she said. "We're going to figure this out together. I'm proud of you."
That was all he needed. Jake took the next step toward what he knew was his purpose. He began volunteering with a local youth organization, spending his weekends mentoring troubled teens, offering them the wisdom and guidance he had learned over the years. At first, it was uncomfortable. There were moments of doubt, moments when Jake wondered if he was making a difference at all. But as the weeks went by, he began to see the impact of his presence. The young people he mentored began to open up to him, sharing their struggles, their dreams, and their fears. Jake saw in their eyes the same restlessness he had felt years ago, the same yearning for purpose, for something more. The work wasn't always easy. There were days when Jake questioned whether he was doing enough, but as he leaned into his faith, he began to see the fruits of his labor. He wasn't just teaching them practical skills, he was offering them a chance at a better future. And in doing so, he was transforming his own life in the process. As Jake continued his work, he realized that the life he had once thought was enough had only been the beginning of the journey. Stepping into his purpose had brought him more fulfillment than he had ever imagined. The struggles, the doubts, and the fears had been part of the refining process. They had been preparing him for this moment, the moment when he could truly say that he was living in alignment with his faith and his purpose. Jake's story is a testament to the fact that it's never too late to embrace the life God has planned for you. It's never too late to rise, to step out of your comfort zone, and to walk into the unknown with faith. The path may not always be clear, but with God's guidance, it will lead you exactly where you need to be. The time to rise is now. Your purpose is waiting for you to step into it. Embrace the shift. The truth that awaits you has always been there, and now is the time to discover it. The life you were meant to live is within your reach. The first sign that Mark Reynolds was about to change his life forever came in the form of an ordinary Sunday afternoon. Mark, 58 years old, had lived his entire life in a small town in Michigan. He had done everything right. Graduated from college, got married, had 2 kids, bought a house with a white picket fence, and spent the last 30 years working as a mechanical engineer at the same company. His life was the kind of American dream people aspire to: a stable job, a family he loved, and a house that felt like home. But as Mark sat on the porch of his modest suburban home, watching the golden sun dip beneath the horizon, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It wasn't the kind of missing where you wish for more money, a bigger house, or a new car. It was a deeper kind of longing, something that gnawed at his soul. He had everything he could ask for, yet it felt incomplete. He had been so focused on checking off the boxes of life, get a good job, raise good kids, be a good husband, that he had forgotten to ask himself, what is my true purpose? Mark had been raised in a Christian household, the kind where Sunday mornings were reserved for church and the evenings for family time. Prayer before meals, Bible stories before bed, and the idea that God had a plan for everyone were lessons that had been ingrained in him from a young age.
He had always believed in the concept of purpose, after all. It was right there in the Bible, wasn't it? God has a plan for you, a plan for a hope and a future. But in recent years, Mark found himself adrift. The work you did felt like a means to an end. Money, stability, and security. But it no longer sparked the joy or fulfillment it once had. His faith had become a routine, a habit, rather than something that inspired his heart. That afternoon, as Mark stared into the distance, a verse came to his mind. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. For the first time in a long time, those words didn't just pass through his mind. They settled deep within him. It was as if God himself had whispered those words to Mark, reminding him of the truth he had long forgotten. You are meant for more. Your life has purpose. Mark had always known the verse, but now it felt like the first time he had truly heard it. Plans to prosper you, he thought. Plans to give you a hope and a future. For the first time in years, Mark felt a stirring within his heart. The life he had built was good, but it wasn't the life he was meant to live. It was time to listen to the call that had been quietly tugging at him for years. It was time to embrace the shift. The next few days were filled with turmoil and confusion. Mark didn't know exactly what the next steps were, but he knew he couldn't keep going down the same path. He didn't want to abandon his responsibilities, his family, his home, the security they had built. The fear of making a mistake, of taking the wrong step, crept into his mind like a shadow. He had always been a man who prided himself on being stable, reliable, and practical. Taking risks wasn't in his nature, but for the first time, he realized that the greatest risk wasn't in changing course. It was in staying where he was, living a life that felt empty, stuck in a routine that wasn't fulfilling him. Mark found himself praying more often in the days that followed. He prayed for clarity, for wisdom, for guidance. And while he didn't receive a clear answer overnight, he felt something deep in his heart that he couldn't ignore. A gentle pull, a quiet nudge, telling him to trust, to step out in faith. He didn't need to have everything figured out, he realized. What mattered was the first step, the leap of faith. It wasn't easy to talk about it, but one evening after dinner, Mark sat down with his wife, Sarah. She had noticed the change in him over the past few weeks, the way he seemed distracted, deep in thought. He had always been the steady one in their marriage, the one who kept things running smoothly. She had never seen him like this before. Sarah, Mark began, his voice low. I've been thinking a lot about my life, about everything we've built, and I feel like God is calling me to do something more, something bigger than what I'm doing now.
Sarah sat quietly, studying his face.
What do you mean? She asked, concern mixing with curiosity. I don't know exactly, Mark replied, but I feel like I'm being called to step out of my comfort zone. I've been working in the same job for 30 years. I'm good at it, and it pays the bills, but I don't feel alive anymore. I've spent so much of my life focusing on what's expected, providing for the family, getting ahead, securing our future, that I've lost touch with what really matters. I want to do something that makes a difference. I want to serve others, to live with purpose again. Sarah was silent for a moment, absorbing his words.
You've always been so reliable, Mark. I know you've worked hard for us, and I appreciate it. But I can see that something has changed in you.
I don't know what this looks like, but I trust you. If this is what you feel called to do, then I'm with you. Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him. Sarah's support meant the world to him, and in that moment, he knew he wasn't alone. The fear was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy now. The next few months were a whirlwind of decisions and changes. Mark didn't know exactly where he was headed, but he knew he couldn't stay in the same place anymore. He began researching ways to get involved in his community, searching for opportunities to serve others in a way that aligned with his faith. He reached out to local organizations, volunteering his time at shelters, food banks, and youth centers. With each new opportunity, Mark felt a sense of purpose return to his life. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, there would be uncertainty, and there would be moments of doubt. But for the first time in years, Mark felt truly alive. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. He was following God's calling. One day, Mark received an email from a local nonprofit organization looking for a program director to help lead a new initiative aimed at providing mentorship and job training for at-risk youth. The position was a huge leap, but when Mark read the description, he knew it was what he had been waiting for. It aligned with everything he had been praying for: an opportunity to make a difference, to serve others, and to use his skills in a way that would bring him fulfillment. Mark didn't hesitate. He applied for the job, and after a few interviews, he was offered the position. The transition wasn't easy. He had to leave behind the security of his engineering job, and the fear of failure still loomed. But with each step, he felt God's hand guiding him. This was the life he was meant to live. As Mark settled into his new role, he realized how much he had been missing. Every day he saw the difference he was making in the lives of the young people he mentored. He was teaching them practical skills, but more than that, he was offering them hope. He was showing them that their past didn't define their future, and that they too had a purpose. Mark's faith, once dormant and distant, had come alive again. He saw God's hand in everything: his struggles, his doubts, and the victories that followed. He no longer felt like he was just existing. He was living with purpose, fulfilling the calling that God had placed on his heart all those years ago. The life he had built was good, but it wasn't the life he had been meant to live. This new path, though uncertain and filled with challenges, was the one that brought him true joy. Mark's journey is a reminder that God's plan for us is often far greater than anything we could have imagined for ourselves. The struggles we face, the doubts we carry, and the fears that threaten to hold us back are all part of the process that prepares us for the life we were meant to live. It's never too late to step into your purpose, to trust that God is guiding you, and to rise above the fear of the unknown. The truth that awaits you has always been there, waiting for you to step into it. Your purpose is already written in the stars, and all you have to do is take that first step. Don't wait for the perfect moment. The time to rise is now. The world needs you to embrace your calling. Be ready, chosen one. For Greg Mason, 62, the turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. He had been sitting in his recliner, as he did most days after retirement, flipping through the channels on his TV without really watching anything. It was the usual routine: wake up, drink coffee, watch the news, go for a walk, and then sit. It wasn't a bad life, but it wasn't the life he imagined when he was younger. When Greg was in his 30s, he had visions of traveling the world, of being a man of influence, of doing something that left a mark. But over the years, his dreams had been swallowed by responsibilities, by the need to provide for his family, and by the quiet expectations of those around him. Greg had spent the last 40 years as a high school teacher, shaping young minds and guiding his students to reach their potential. He was proud of his work, proud of the lives he had touched. But now, in his retirement, Greg had started to feel like something was missing. It wasn't that he regretted the path he had chosen. It had been a good life. But there was an emptiness in his heart that he couldn't ignore. For years, he had followed the expectations of others, always doing what was necessary, always meeting the needs of his family, always doing the right thing. But he realized that somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with his own deeper calling. He had always been a man of faith, attending church regularly, volunteering with the youth group, and being a supportive member of his community. Yet in recent years, his connection to his faith had grown distant. Church services felt routine, his prayers felt mechanical, and he began to wonder if he was just going through the motions of life. What was the point of all of it? Was there more to his existence than this quiet retirement, this slow fade into old age? That Tuesday afternoon, as the rain pattered against his windows, Greg's thoughts wandered back to a time when he had been deeply passionate about his faith. He remembered the days when he was younger, when he felt God's calling on his life like a fire in his heart. He had dreams then, dreams of serving others, of making a difference in the world, of doing something that truly mattered. But as the years passed, those dreams were put on hold. The routine of life took over. The bills, the responsibilities, the demands of being a father and a husband had filled up his time and energy. His faith, too, had become routine, something he did because he was supposed to, not because it sparked joy in his heart. But today, something was different. As he sat there, staring out the window, Greg suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. "You're not done yet," a voice in his spirit whispered. "There's more for you to do." It was as if the veil had been lifted from his eyes, and for the first time in years, he could see beyond the walls of his current life. He realized that God was still calling him to something greater, to live a life of purpose, to serve others, to step out of the comfortable life he had built and embrace the plan that had always been there for him. Greg's heart began to race, a mixture of excitement and fear flooding his chest. Could it be true? Could he still make a difference at this stage in his life? He had always thought of himself as being too old for big changes, too set in his ways. But now, the message was clear. He was not finished yet. There was a new chapter waiting for him to embrace. The days following that realization were filled with a whirlwind of thoughts, prayers, and questions. Greg found himself in constant conversation with God, asking for guidance, the clarity, and for the courage to take the next step. The doubt still lingered, though. What if I fail? What if I'm too old for this? He had spent so many years being responsible, dependable, and safe. The idea of risking it all, of stepping into something unknown, was terrifying. He had a comfortable life. He had earned his retirement. Why rock the boat now? But the voice inside of him kept urging him to trust. He began to recall the verses from the Bible that had always given him strength, especially Isaiah 41:10, which reminded him, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." The words wrapped around his heart like a warm embrace. God had always been with him, through every trial, every change, and every challenge. And now, as he faced this new season, he was being asked to trust again, to trust in God's timing, to trust in his plan, and to step forward in faith. Greg spent the next few weeks praying and reflecting on what this new calling might look like. He didn't have all the answers. He wasn't sure what the next steps would be. But one thing was clear. He couldn't ignore the call anymore. He needed to step out of his comfort zone. He needed to let go of the life he had built and follow the path that God had laid out for him. One afternoon, Greg decided to visit his old church, the place where he had first felt the spark of his calling many years ago. As he walked through the familiar doors, He was struck by how much had changed, yet how much had stayed the same. The pews, the stained glass windows, the familiar smell of old wood. Everything felt like a part of his past. But today it felt different. It felt like a moment of sacred significance. He sat down in his usual spot, bowed his head, and prayed, asking for God's direction. And as he prayed, a deep peace filled him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he was on the right path. After that prayer, Greg's life began to shift in ways he never expected. He started reaching out to local organizations, volunteering his time to help with community outreach programs and mentoring young people. He became involved with a non-profit that helped homeless veterans find jobs and housing. As he worked alongside others, Greg felt his passion reignite. He saw how his life experience, his years of teaching, mentoring, and guiding others could be used to help those who were struggling, those who needed direction, and those who had lost their way. The work was rewarding, but not easy. There were moments of frustration, moments when he questioned if he was truly making a difference. But each time doubt crept in, Greg turned to his faith, trusting that God had a plan for this new chapter of his life. With every person he helped, every life he touched, he felt his heart grow fuller. He was doing the work he had always been meant to do. His relationship with Sarah also began to deepen. As Greg shared his experiences with her, she saw the transformation in him. The man who had once been consumed by routine and responsibility was now alive with purpose. They spent more time together, discussing their dreams for the future and how they could serve others together.
Sarah had always been supportive, but now she too felt a sense of excitement about what the future held. As the months passed, Greg saw how his life had changed. He was no longer stuck in a rut, no longer merely existing. He had stepped into a life of service, of faith, and of purpose. The work was hard, but it brought him joy. He no longer felt disconnected from his faith. In fact, his faith had grown stronger than ever before. He saw the hand of God in everything he did, in the people he mentored, in the communities he served, and in the moments of quiet reflection when he felt God's presence most profoundly. Looking back, Greg realized that the struggles he had faced, his doubts, his fears, his feelings of being unfulfilled, had been the very things that had prepared him for this new chapter. Every challenge had been part of the refining process. Every moment of discomfort had been shaping him for the purpose he was now living.
Now, as Greg continued his work, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He was living the life he had always dreamed of, but it was even better than he had imagined. He had stepped into his calling, embraced the purpose God had for him, and in doing so, he had found peace. The life he had built was good, but the life he was living now was greater. It was a life that reflected God's plan for him, a life of service, of love, and of faith. Greg's journey is a powerful reminder that no matter where you are in life, no matter your age, it is never too late to embrace God's plan for you. The struggles you've faced, the doubts you've had, and the fears you've carried are not signs of failure. They are the preparation you need to step into the life you were meant to live. God has a purpose for you, and now is the time to embrace it. Your path has always been guided. The truth that awaits you is closer than you think. Step into it with faith, with courage, and with the confidence that God is walking with you every step of the way. The world needs your light, your gifts, and your heart. Be ready. The time to rise is now. After weeks of wrestling with his doubts and fears, Ben Harris sat quietly on the front porch of his house, watching the sun set over the horizon of his small town in North Carolina. At 55, Ben was a man who had lived a life defined by routine. He was a father, a husband, and a loyal worker at a local hardware store. On paper, his life was everything people strived for, a good job, a loving family, a comfortable home. But inside, Ben had felt something missing for years. It was the kind of feeling that crept in at night when he was alone with his thoughts. It wasn't that he was unhappy. He had everything he needed: food on the table, a stable job, and people who cared about him. But something deep within him stirred, a longing for more.
He had spent so many years focused on the here and now that he had lost sight of what mattered most. There was a moment in his youth when he had dreamed of becoming more than just a man working day in and day out to pay the bills. He had always dreamed of making a difference, of using his hands, his heart, and his faith to serve others. But life had a way of sweeping him along, and his dreams were left behind. Ben's story was a familiar one in America, the story of a man who had lived his life by the book, who had worked hard, followed the rules, and fulfilled his responsibilities. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten to ask the question, what am I really living for? He had gotten so wrapped up in the demands of life that he had stopped listening to the voice inside that had once told him to dream bigger. That voice had been there, buried under the responsibilities, but Ben had ignored it for too long.
As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape, Ben's thoughts turned to his faith. Growing up, his parents had taught him to trust in God's plan for his life. But as the years went on, that trust had faded. He had attended church every Sunday, recited his prayers, and lived a good life. But something felt like it was missing. The connection he once felt to God had weakened, and he began to wonder if he had been walking down the wrong path all along. That night, Ben prayed like he hadn't prayed in years. He asked God for clarity, for direction, and for the strength to listen to the calling he had long ignored. He asked for the courage to take a step of faith, to rise above the fear and uncertainty that had kept him in his comfort zone. He didn't know what God had in store for him, but he knew he couldn't keep living like this. Not when he felt the weight of unfulfilled purpose pressing down on his soul. As he knelt by his bed, the words of Jeremiah 29:11 came to his mind. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Ben had heard this verse many times before, but tonight it hit him differently. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something deeper, something more profound. God had a plan for him. His life was meant for something greater than he had imagined. The days after that prayer were filled with uncertainty and self-doubt. Ben knew that something needed to change, but the fear of leaving behind the stability he had worked so hard for paralyzed him. How could he walk away from the security of his job, his home, his community? His mind raced with the what-ifs. What if it didn't work out? What if he failed? What would his family think? These thoughts crowded out the peace he had felt during his prayer. He wanted to follow God's call, but the unknown was terrifying. One afternoon, as Ben sat in the living room, looking through old photo albums with his wife Linda, the weight of his thoughts seemed even heavier. His wife had always been his rock, the one who had stood by him through thick and thin, but he wasn't sure how she would react to his desire for change. She had always supported his decisions, but this felt different. This wasn't just about changing jobs or going back to school. This was about stepping into something unknown, something that would take him out of his comfort zone. Linda, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've been thinking about something. I feel like God is calling me to something greater, something bigger than what I've been doing. I'm not sure what it is, but I know I can't ignore it anymore. Linda looked out from the photo album, her eyes filled with concern. What do you mean, Ben? We've built a good life here. You've got a good job, and we're comfortable.
Why would you want to throw that away?
I'm not throwing it away.
Ben said, his voice growing steadier. "But I'm not living the life God has called me to. I feel like I've been stuck in a routine doing what's expected of me, but not really living with purpose. I want to serve others. I want to do something that matters." Linda took a deep breath, her hand resting gently on his. "I can see how much this is weighing on you. I don't know what God has planned for you, but if this is what you feel called to do, then I'll support you. I know it's a big change, but you don't have to go through it alone." Her words were exactly what Ben needed to hear. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace flood his heart. The fear was still there, but now, with Linda's support, he knew he wasn't making this decision alone. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he trusted that God would guide him, just as he always had.
In the weeks that followed, Ben began to take the first steps toward his new calling. He reached out to organizations in the community that focused on helping those in need. He spent time volunteering at a local homeless shelter and mentoring young men who were struggling to find their way. Every day, he felt his passion reignite. He wasn't just living for himself anymore. He was living for a greater purpose. But the road was not without its challenges. There were days when Ben doubted his decision, when he questioned whether he had done the right thing. The uncertainty was difficult to bear, and there were moments when he wanted to turn back. But each time doubt crept in, Ben turned to prayer, asking God for the strength to keep moving forward. And with each step, he felt his faith growing stronger. It was during a late-night conversation with his son, Luke, that Ben realized just how far he had come.
Luke had been skeptical of his father's decision at first, but one evening, as they sat together, Luke said, "Dad, I've seen the change in you. You're more alive now than I've ever seen you. I don't know what God has planned for you, but I know you're doing the right thing." Ben smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I don't know where this is leading, son, but I'm trusting God's plan. I'm stepping out in faith, and I believe He'll lead me where I need to go." Months later, Ben found himself standing in front of a group of young men at a local community center. He was now leading a program that mentored at-risk youth, providing them with the tools they needed to build a better future. Ben could see the change in their eyes. These were young people who had struggled with hopelessness, with uncertainty, but now they were finding their way. And Ben was there to guide them, to show them that they too had a purpose.
As he stood there, speaking to the group, he realized that this was what he had been waiting for all along. This was the life he had been meant to live, the life of service, of purpose, and of faith. He had stepped into the calling that God had placed on his heart years ago, and now he was living it every day. Ben's journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. He had faced his fears, stepped into the unknown, and trusted that God's plan for him was greater than anything he could have imagined. The truth had been waiting for him all along, and now, as he looked back on the path he had walked, he could see how every moment, every struggle, and every step had brought him to this point. Ben's story is a powerful reminder that it's never too late to embrace the life God has called you to. The path you walk, the struggles you face, and the doubts you carry are all part of the process of discovering your true purpose. Trust that God has a plan for you, one that's greater than anything you can imagine. Step out in faith, embrace the truth that awaits, and rise to the life you were always meant to live. The time to act is now. The life you've been waiting for is within your reach. Embrace the calling. Embrace the shift. The world is waiting for you. Be ready. For years, Emma Turner had lived in the shadow of expectations, both her own and those of her family. At 54, Emma was a successful lawyer in Houston, Texas, having worked her way up through the ranks of a prestigious law firm. She had always been the type of person who followed the rules, did what was expected, and never strayed from the path laid before her. But deep within her, Emma had always felt a disconnect, a quiet ache that lingered even on the happiest of days. It wasn't that she didn't love her family, her career, or her home. It was just that, despite all the success, there was a part of her that felt like something was missing, something she couldn't quite name. Her faith had always been central to her life, rooted in the teachings of her parents who had raised her in the church. She had always trusted in God's plan, knowing that everything in life happened for a reason. But lately, as she stood in the quiet moments of reflection, she found herself asking, "Is this the plan God intended for me? Was this successful career, this comfortable life, really what she had been called to do? Or had she too become lost in the grind of daily life, focusing on ambition and accomplishment, while her deeper calling lay unfulfilled?" The truth was, Emma had always known that there was something more for her. She had a passion for helping people, really helping them, beyond the legal briefs and corporate strategies. When she was younger, she had dreamed of making a difference in the world, of serving in a way that aligned with her faith and her heart. But somewhere along the way, the demands of work and family had taken over. She had buried those dreams under the weight of responsibilities. And now, as she sat in her office late one evening, the question came rushing back. What if there's more? What if I'm supposed to do something different? Something that aligns with God's plan for my life? That evening, as she opened her Bible to seek clarity, she landed on Romans 8:28. "And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." For the first time in years, those words didn't just wash over her, they pierced her heart. Called according to His purpose. Emma had read this verse countless times, but tonight it felt different. She wasn't just reading it for comfort. She was reading it for the truth it held about her own life.
God had a purpose for her. She knew it in her bones. It was time to stop ignoring it and to start living in alignment with it. The next morning, she woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The realization had hit her. Her life had been focused on success, but it was time to shift her focus. She could no longer keep chasing achievements for the sake of achievements. She needed to follow the path that God had laid before her, to listen to the call that had been whispering in her heart for years. She wasn't done yet. She wasn't meant to live in the shadows of success without purpose. It was time to step into her calling. As Emma sat at her kitchen table that morning, her heart racing with anticipation, the fear began to settle in. The idea of changing everything about her life, leaving behind a career she had worked so hard to build, stepping into an unknown future, was terrifying. She was comfortable. She had security. She had worked tirelessly to build her life.
Was she really ready to leave all of that behind? She couldn't deny the deep sense of fulfillment that had eluded her in recent years. Despite her success, something inside her told her that this wasn't the life God had intended for her. She had to trust that God's plan was bigger than the one she had constructed for herself. But trusting that wasn't easy. It meant stepping into the unknown, stepping away from the safety net of her current life. Later that evening, Emma sat down with her husband, Tom. They had been married for over 25 years, and he had always supported her dreams. But this felt different. The fear and uncertainty weighed heavily on her as she spoke. "Tom," she began, her voice tentative, "I've been praying and reflecting on my life, and I feel like God is calling me to something different. Something bigger than what I'm doing now. I'm not sure what it looks like yet, but I feel like it's time to make a change." Tom looked at her with concern.
What do you mean a change? You've worked so hard to get where you are. We've built a good life. I don't understand why you would walk away from all that. Emma took a deep breath. I'm not sure what this will look like, but
I feel like I'm supposed to serve in a different way. I've been blessed with so much, Tom, and I feel like I've been given the opportunity to do more. I want to help people in a way that aligns with my faith, whether that's mentoring young women, working with the homeless, or just finding a way to serve my community. Tom was silent for a long moment, clearly processing her words. Emma held her breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he spoke softly. Emma, I know this isn't easy for you, but if you feel like God is calling you to do something more, then I'll support you. We'll figure it out together. Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she heard his words. For the first time in a long time, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders.
The fear didn't go away, but she felt a surge of peace, knowing that Tom believed in her and was ready to walk this uncertain road with her.